We turn now to Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Ambassador, good to have you back. I understand Russia has been attacking Kyiv as recently as overnight. What can you tell us?
Good morning, Margaret. Yes, another very difficult day and night in Kyiv. And not only Kyiv, Cherkasy, and some other places. More than 165 Shahed drones, Iranian drones, have been deployed again against completely civilian targets. So unfortunately, this is a horrible reality during the past 1,166 days. Every day, regardless of Russia says, there are some attacks and there are civilian casualties and there are civilian destructions. For the same 1,166 days, we work diligently on getting, not only defending us, but getting to peace. And Ukraine is devoted to peace.
There has been a shift in tone, at least, between the Trump administration and your president. President Zelensky told reporters Friday that his conversation with President Trump at the Pope's funeral was the best meeting they've ever had, and he's confident things will look different now. What is he indicating? What's coming next? When do they speak next?
Look, our partnership with the U.S. is very important for us. U.S. has been and is a strategic partnership. We are really grateful to American people for all the support that we are getting from the U.S. It would not be possible for us to defend ourselves without those javelins, without those weapons that U.S. has provided us. And it was President Trump who decided to provide us javelins when I was still a finance minister.
Back in 2017.
And it was back in 2017. And then large support from American people during the past 3 years have really been a game changer, and we are very grateful for it. The meeting was great, and as you know, after that meeting, we have signed really a great agreement, economic partnership agreement between our two nations, which will take that partnership to a new level. So, look, we might have some disagreements in some areas, but Ukraine is committed to peace. Ukraine wants peace more than anyone, and we need U.S. Our countries are based on the same values. We are defending freedom in Ukraine. We are not the ones who started this war. And now it's not only the right or moral thing to support Ukraine, but also U.S. has, as your Secretary of Treasury said, an interest and specific economic interest in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about that deal. This is what's often described as a minerals agreement, but it's a broader economic partnership that's going forth for ratification in your government this week, I understand. This was agreed to, but Russia's foreign minister has said that the mineral deposits that exist in Ukraine in the east are one reason his country wouldn't withdraw from that area. So can the U.S. and Ukraine make this deal work if Russian troops are still in the area where those mineral deposits largely are?
Margaret, as you said, this is an economic partnership agreement to create an investment fund for both of our nations to benefit from amazing investment opportunities that Ukraine has. We discussed before, and I'm so glad that we can not only discuss the horrible tragedy and destruction brought by Russian unprovoked invasion, but also of the bright future that we, together with America and other countries, can have. Ukraine has agricultural land and black soil, and with the technologies, even during the war, we feed more than 400 million people. We have energy, we have critical mineral deposits, we have so much, including the human talent, and we can develop it together. So look, when Russians criticize something, it's a sign for all of us that we are doing something right.
Yeah.
This deal will work, and it will work if Ukraine is peaceful.
Let's talk more on the other side of this commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return now to our conversation with Ukrainian Ambassador Oksana Markarova. We've been discussing the deal that the United States and Ukraine came to in regard to this economic partnership. I've read that the deal counts future U.S. military assistance in the form of ammunition, weapons systems, and training as a contribution to the investment fund, and that Ukraine will not reimburse Washington for past military aid. Is that how it's set up?
Well, first of all, it's important that it's going to be, as we say, a 50-50 deal. So we together will set up that fund, we will run it together, And all the future contribution that or investments that U.S. will be providing us, including military deals, will be counted as contribution to that fund. And Ukraine will be also committing the proceeds from the new licenses and new developments into the fund. So essentially, it's a true partnership where we would be able to put resources together in order to invest into a wide range of projects, including infrastructure, including rare earths, including critical minerals, and both of our nations will benefit from it.
When does that get up and running?
We are working very actively on it. As you saw, the deal between the governments have been signed. It's going to be ratified by our parliament, hopefully soon. You have seen strong messages from President Zelensky, and it's his vision and vision of President Trump behind the deal that is moving it forward. Of course, there will be the creation of the fund, the setup of the fund. I used to work in private equity in my previous life. That takes a little bit of time, but we are moving very fast. So hopefully the teams will come, put everything together, and we'll start working.
But within this, there aren't security guarantees. Are there promises of future military aid from the United States? Because if this effort to get a peace deal together doesn't work, the fate of the war is still in question.
Well, you know, the situation with Russian aggression towards Ukraine is so complex. There are many. We're discussing the potential possible peace deals. We're discussing this economic partnership deal, which is already signed. We're discussing other possible scenarios and security guarantees and involvement of other friends and allies. And, you know, Europe has been more active and proactive in a number of areas. So this economic partnership deal in itself is a very important part of the broader security architecture, if I may say so. And frankly, that fund will be successful if Ukraine is stable and peaceful. So in a way, it's an important part of the future security guarantees.
Vladimir Putin told Russian state TV he thinks that he can bring this war to a logical conclusion. He avoided the word war. He said this thing that started in 2022. But he said there's been no need to use nuclear weapons and, quote, I hope they will not be required. How do you interpret that?
Well, it's very difficult to interpret a man and a so-called leader of the nation who attacked Georgia in 2008, attacked Ukraine in 2014, conducted 2 genocidal wars on his own, in his own federation against Chechnya, did war crimes in Syria, poisoned people in Great Britain. I mean, I think at this point, it doesn't matter how we interpret what he says. We just have to believe what he says and understand what he says. He's a threat not only to Ukraine, but also to anyone who believes that nations should live peacefully, do not challenge each other's borders, and just focus on the economic cooperation. That's what we are doing with the United States. Yeah. And hopefully our collective efforts, and with Europe, with all the Baltic and Nordic states, with all the friends and allies, including Japan, including UK, including so many people that are coming together in order to bring peace not only to our part of the world, but globally, because it's important. Yeah. Putin is doing it together with Iran and North Korea. They are not hiding it. They are supporting other terroristic regimes. And we should also stay together in order to bring peace.
Ambassador, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. We turn now to retired Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. He served as National Security Advisor during President Trump's first term, and he is the author of At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. Good to have you back with us.
Hey, great to be with you, Margaret.
So you've been here. Mike Waltz is no longer the National Security Advisor. CBS reported his deputy, Alex Wong, will also depart his role, but then as of Friday morning, we found Wong was still on the job. It is not clear what the National Security Council makeup will be or how long the Secretary of State will be at the head of it, advising the president. What significance does this have for America's national security?
I think it's significant, Margaret, because I think what it reveals is a fight that's going on within the administration associated with our role in the world and how certain people in the administration perceive America's role in the world. And I think Mike Waltz was an America First guy, but he was an internationalist and prioritized, I think, our alliances. He knew that, I think that quite correctly that Putin won't stop until he is stopped, and so he was an advocate for a strong approach to Putin. And I think there are those in the administration who have a much different worldview, who are in favor of U.S. retrenchment or disengagement from complex challenges abroad, want to prioritize kind of the Western Hemisphere, North American defense. And you see that in your discussion with Congressman Turner as well, associated with the defense budget and what's being prioritized in the defense budget as well.
Mm-hmm. So you see this as a policy argument, not just a signal messaging mistake that Mike Waltz created that channel where he accidentally included a reporter.
It is. I think it's a policy issue, a worldview issue, but it's also an understanding of the role of the National Security Council staff and the national security staff that Mike Waltz was running and Alex Wong is still running. And that's really the staff that allows the president to drive his agenda, that gets best analysis, best advice to the president, and gets him multiple options. It seems pretty clear that President Trump is not very patient in terms of a deliberative process these days. And this is why I think he may see the National Security Council staff as an impediment instead of really the best vehicle to drive his agenda and to integrate all elements of national power and efforts of like-minded partners to advance American interests.
I thought it was an interesting point Congressman Turner made when he brought up the specific point of reference the president has for the National Security Council during his first term, which is, Turner argued, seeing them as the reason he was impeached, or during his first impeachment related to Ukraine. Do you think that is something that makes him distrust the council? Why is it that he would take the advice of someone like Laura Loomer, this far-right activist who has made racist attacks on some of the members of that council?
Yeah, Margaret, I think there are three types of people in any administration. Those who are there to give the president best advice, those who are there not for that, but want to manipulate decisions consistent with their own agenda. These are people inside and outside of the administration. And there's a third group of people who sometimes take on the role of maybe saving the country and the world from the president. That second and third group, if you have an effective national security decision-making process that gives the president multiple options, they tend to oppose that process. They tend to oppose the national security advisor. And I think what you're seeing is how easy it is for certain people to get in the president's ear, to sow distrust, to drive a wedge between him and the national security advisor in this case, or the national security staff and those who are there to get him multiple options.
You referenced the different worldviews of some of the people advising the president right now, particularly regarding our allies. In Europe, we saw an interesting decision this week in Germany. Their domestic intelligence agency concluded an investigation into a far-right political party known as AfD. They declared it to be an extremist group because of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim positions. Their leaders have trivialized the Holocaust. They've called for deporting non-white citizens because that violates the German Constitution. This would sound like a domestic issue. However, the Vice President and the Secretary of State have taken very public statements here, wading into this. Rubio calling it tyranny in disguise. Vice President Vance also weighing in here. Do you think that's advisable when that party's leaders have such a troubled history? Can you explain it?
Yeah, part of this, Margaret, is what you covered earlier in the show about this kind of women, peace, and security initiative, as well as, I would say, some of the radical DEI agendas of the Biden and maybe the Obama administration before that. This is like an equal and opposite reaction, and it's international. And this is one of the reasons why there are some people in the United States who kind of regard Putin as the savior of Western civilization or Christianity and so forth, which is obviously kind of a perverse view of him as well. But I think what's related to this is this sort of this emphasis on retrenchment, just take care of ourselves, disengage from the world. And I think that these are related. What's I think interesting about this, though, is that the Trump administration, I think, risks replicating the flaws of the Obama administration's policy. Because what you see is now some people in the Republican Party seeing the source of all ills in the world as like the neocons, and they trace that back in particular to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So that blaming ourselves, other Americans, for the ills of the world, and the associated impulse toward disengagement risks recreating, I think, some of the fundamental flaws in sort of the Obama administration approach to the world.
H.R. McMaster, thank you for sharing your insight. We'll leave it there, and we'll be back in a moment. In a commencement address last week at the University of Alabama, President Trump told journalism majors that he's not sure he likes the press, but acknowledged a free press is important.
We need a brilliant press. They're like a watchkeeper. They're very important, and you can go out and take it down a new track, help save the country. The people of this country, they know the truth when they hear it. That's why the ratings, the approval numbers of the media are so low.
Last week, the president ordered a cutoff to federal funding to two major public broadcasting systems, PBS and NPR. For more now, we're joined by CEOs Catherine Maher and Paula Kerger. Good to have you both together.
Great to be here.
So the president issued this order for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which oversees you both, to cut off funding. Are you both filing lawsuits, and on what basis can you challenge this?
We're looking at whatever options are available to us. I think it's a little preliminary for us to be able to speak to the specific strategies that we might take.
Is that the same for PBS?
Yeah, we're obviously looking, and I would just say that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a funding mechanism, but they actually don't oversee PBS or NPR. We're independent organizations.
Important point to make. But the threat of cutting off funding, whether it was in Congress or the president saying he's doing it now, that's not new, right? That's been a talking point for years. There have been efforts in Congress. You do have funding, I think, through 2027, but it feels a little bit different this time. Do you have a backup funding plan?
Yeah, it is different this time, and I've been through these battles now for a number of years. I've been at PBS almost 20 years, and I remember even going back to the Newt Gingrich days. But this is different. They're coming after us on many different ways. We're waiting for a possible rescission of those funds that have already been appropriated.
A clawing back.
There was an effort within the FCC challenging our ability to accept sponsorships from corporations, which is something that we have worked with the FCC on for many, many years. There was the executive order. There was the effort to try to remove a few members of the CPB board. So we have never seen a circumstance like this. And obviously, we're going to be pushing back very hard, because what's at risk are our stations, our public television, our public radio stations across the country. We get 15% of our funding from the federal government. That's 15%, but that's an aggregate number. Some of our stations in small communities, it's 40 to 50% of their funding, and for them it's existential, and that's what's at risk if this funding goes away.
So is it immediate for NPR?
In a similar fashion, if we were to see a clawback of these funds, which we know is part of the conversation from a rescission standpoint, or if we were to see that stations were no longer able to participate in their membership dues, that would be damaging. But I think that Paula's point is the one that really people need to hear. The immediate damages to local stations. And with NPR, we have stations in more than 246 stations with newsrooms, more than 200 newsrooms in every state in the country, and that includes journalists who are out there covering their local communities, especially in a time where we're seeing an advance of news deserts across the nation. 20% of Americans don't have access to another local source of news. The impact of this could really be devastating, particularly in rural communities.
The president tweeted or socialed or truthed, Republicans must defund and totally disassociate themselves from NPR and PBS, the radical left monsters that so badly hurt our country. I have to tell you, I heard monsters and I thought of Cookie Monster. I thought of
did too,
Sesame
actually.
Street, and I thought of that children's programming.
Right.
That is in many ways what people think of when they think of PBS.
Absolutely.
Is that impacted too?
Absolutely. And out of this executive order, we believe it impacts our funding out of the Department of Education, which is a 30-year program that has supported the not only the creation of many of the children's programming that you see on public television, but also the research that we do to ensure that that programming is not just safe and enjoyable, but that children, after watching, come away with understanding of basic letters and numbers. Half the kids in this country are not enrolled in formal pre-K. That's why programming for children on public television was created. That was the idea with Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and everything that's followed since is to make sure that children that do not have access to a full array of resources have the opportunity to learn and to develop skills that they'll need the first time they enter preschool. That may be at age 2 or 3 or 4 and sometimes 5, not until they start kindergarten. That's what's at risk.
At risk or right now? I mean, do you have the money to keep functioning?
Well, we have programming, so you're not going to turn on your TV set and not see our children's programming anymore. Okay. But if that funding is cut off, we have programs in development right now, and that will suddenly skid to a halt. We also have stations around the country that work directly with preschool providers and parents, and this funds those activities. So the immediate impact would be fairly significant.
So, Catherine, I want to ask you about the news. When we went and we read the executive order, the language in there says government funding of news media in this environment is outdated and unnecessary, corrosive to the appearance of independence. And Americans have the right to expect if their tax dollars fund public broadcasting that it's fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan. How do you respond to the implication that your news coverage is not?
Is not fair and nonpartisan.
And
I mean, I think
unbiased.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think it's important to note that I'm the CEO and we have an independent editor-in-chief who oversees the newsroom, and so I don't make editorial decisions, and that I think is just always an important point to make. But I think our newsroom would really take issue with that. We have been on air for more than 50 years. We have been covering news as it occurs across the nation, in local communities, overseas. We have an extraordinary Washington desk, and our people report straight down the line. And I think that not only do they do that, they do so with a mission that very few other broadcast organizations have, which is a requirement to serve the entire public. That is the point of public broadcasting, is we bring people together in those conversations. And so we've had a whole host of conservative voices on air of late. We've been making requests of the Trump administration to have their officials on air. We would like to see more people accept those invitations. It's hard for us to be able to say we can speak for everyone when folks won't join us.
So that was the executive order. Then we looked at the White House talking points and what they're putting on social media. They're a lot more about you than you. And on NPR, they were saying things like a July 2022 editor's note that said the Declaration of Independence had offensive language against Native Americans. We checked, and the word savages is used. The White House faults your editors for avoiding the term biological sex when discussing transgender issues. They apparently want you to use the term pro-life and faulted your use of the term anti-abortion rights to refer to activists. So when you see specific editorial criticisms like that, what do you interpret the intention of this being?
Well, I interpret the intention of this being trying to create a narrative around our editorial independence. And as I said in our...
To control it?
To control it. And I think that that is an affront to the First Amendment. We have an independent newsroom, and we will always have an independent newsroom. From my perspective, part of the separation of that the First Amendment offers is to keep government out. In fact, the statute that was written when the Public Broadcasting Act was signed into law was very explicit about interference from any member of the government, whether it is elected officials, whether members of independent agencies, because it is so sacrosanct, that division between the state and independent media.
That was the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. Set it up as a private corporation to give protection from influence and control. I would assume that's also from the White House, influence and control.
That's right. And President Lyndon Johnson, who signed the bill into law, creating the Public Broadcasting Act and creating the system that we all operate within, was very he noted in his remarks upon signing that speech was that it does require a greater wisdom, and that's why we have a 2-year advance appropriation, is to insulate both of our work from political interference. I think that is critical, that Americans understand that public broadcasting is meant to be independent so that we can serve the public interest regardless of whatever administration is in office or whatever Congress's whims are.
And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set up as a private corporation with that same intent. So I think there was a lot of focus, even at that moment, when the act was signed, that protections would need to be put in place. Because if we do our job, it is possible that we will produce content that some people may wish we have done a different way. And this way it gives us the independence. This way, the other thing that keeps us independent is that most of our funding comes from viewers like you. We ask people to make contribution to public broadcasting for something they get for free, because we are available free to every home in this country. And so both the combination of the fact that it was built as a public-private partnership, there would be some public money that went into public broadcasting that would enable stations in small communities to exist, alongside the fact that most of our support comes from people in communities, that really does create something that is very independent and very responsive to the communities that we serve.
And if I may, just to give a sense of those numbers, for every single dollar that the federal government puts in, stations raise on average about $7 from from private sources. And so you also have to recognize that this order interferes with the First Amendment rights of our listeners and viewers who've made a choice to contribute, and this is the news that they want to see and hear, or the programming that they are committed to.
It did just stand out to us as journalists ourselves, because the research shows that, there's declining trust in media, in news, and the president was talking about that himself there, that he wants a free and fair press. We're going to continue to cover this, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.